Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. This show is brought to you by Simplifying, which has been helping build trust in travel for over a decade. Through in-depth conversation with aviation leaders, sustainability in the air breaks through the current clutter and provides a clear roadmap for the future. It's about time we embarked on creating a net zero future for the industry, together. This season of the podcast is brought to you by Carbon Click, leaders in managing carbon offsetting programs for top global airlines. Without further ado, here is your host, Shashank Nigam, CEO of Simplifying.
Welcome to the latest episode where my guest today is Matthias Niederhäuser, who is not a corporate honcho. He doesn't head up an airline or a manufacturer who's thinking about sustainability, but in fact, he is a pilot who has circumnavigated the entire globe this year, landing on Earth Day in his hometown after doing that. But wait for it, he did it using sustainable aviation fuel. Matthias flew around the world on sustainable aviation fuel as much as possible with a friend in a Diamond aircraft. And I just felt this is such an interesting story of a person trying to do his own bit to bring sustainable aviation and make it a reality. So Matthias, welcome to the show and kudos. Tell me, how in the world did you get this crazy idea to go around the world in your own plane using SAF?
Well, hi Shashank, and first of all, thanks a lot for the opportunity of having me here. As you mentioned, and I think that's really important, we try to do as much as possible flying on SAF, but we of course had to use virtual schemes to actually then make the claim that 100% of our fuel burn was SAF, but a bit, or let's say more of that a bit later. So how did we get there? Being pilots, both Robin, who was my project partner, and I, we do appreciate challenges. And ever since getting our licenses as young adults, we dreamt of taking a small plane as far as we possibly can. And quite frankly, that's around the world. So that's where the dream came from. But both of us, we didn't have, let's say, the connection to an aircraft where we could just rent it out for 4 months. We are both in our families first generation pilots. So we didn't just have dad's aircraft, let's say, to use. And so that was a bit of the tricky part. But then, we had a quite fortunate development on that. My dad took one of his clients. He told him, look, you can go flying with Matt. And I was able to take him up. And the aviation bug was transferred from me to him. And he then decided during the pandemic, actually, not because of COVID, but just in that time frame to purchase his own aircraft. And I was able to negotiate a discount for him with the aircraft manufacturer, and in return, of course, to promote their product around the globe. And then we were able to lay our hands on the aircraft. But both of us, especially pre-pandemic, realized when we talked about flying, but also when we talked about our prospects of being professional pilots, for example, my cousins, my relatives in Switzerland, they started asking justifiable questions on sustainability and how we can actually accept doing what we're doing. And first and foremost, it's our passion, obviously, but it comes with a certain toll, and we just wanted to have better answers to what aviation can do in becoming more sustainable. And so we gave Diamondo Earthrounding, that was the name of the project, the theme of connecting sustainable initiatives all around the globe, and of course to do whatever is possible in 2022. And that's what we try to do, and hopefully educate the people we met around the world on what we're doing and how they can get involved.
Wow, that is so interesting. There's so many details here, and I want to drill through one by one. Firstly, it is one thing to be a private pilot and to fly from your home airfield to, 2 airfields away, or do a touch and go in a nearby place. But you actually flew across the globe, 35 countries, over the Pacific Ocean, on sustainable fuel. What did you do to prepare for this challenge that you are going to face? It's not your everyday flight, isn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely not for such a platform, for such an aircraft. Well, convincing our partners that it's safe, that was the most important bit of the journey. No, jokes aside, justifiably, we had to do quite a lot of preparations to make it safe. Or let's say both of us striving to be professional pilots. Robin is a military, an Air Force pilot for the Swiss Air Force, and I'm aspiring to become an airline pilot with Swiss International Airlines. But taking that mindset into such a project was quite important because we spent a lot of time thinking of what can go wrong and then just try to find mitigation action. So we did a sea survival training where they cramped us into an airframe, stuck us underwater, and we had to get out. And as one could expect, like the first attempt was not successful. Me trying to be the first guy out, I blocked the exit, so Robin unfortunately would have drowned because of my incompetence. But yeah, it was good learnings. We then developed procedures from that, but also we had to do a lot of certification work on just getting the external or the extra fuel tank certified, which the aircraft needed to cross such long distances. And there was a lot of then also preparation works with our team. We had a team of 6 students and a good friend of mine who volunteered, and they took up various roles, and we of course had to brief them on their duties but also on the conduct. So yeah, COVID then just threw in let's say another interesting aspect of our trip to get it done, because it was so regulated in terms of entry and exit requirements that yeah, planning was just super intense, especially in the last 3-4 months before the project took off.
You mentioned Robin a couple of times. Who's Robin? How did you even meet him?
So Robin and I met during the first days of undergrad university, and I mean, the connection just clicked because of our passion for aviation and especially for piloting. And then ever since we spent some time actually as flatmates as well. And yeah, we let's say we developed that dream together, and then it just over the years we've been flying together, we developed, let's say, very healthy expectation management when we're in the cockpit together. So we don't need to talk about a lot of things because we know what the other thinks, and that makes it quite a bit easier to actually conduct a flight, especially if you go into the unknown and if you face some, let's say, occasions where you need to come up with a solution on spot. And so we were able to support each other, both having, let's say, different strength in different fields or also in different areas. And yeah, we realized early on doing projects, but also flying together, that in the combination, usually the result turns out quite okay.
Wow. Now, what was the longest leg you did? Was this over the Pacific somewhere?
Exactly, yeah. We actually, because of trade wind influence, it was, let's say, great distance wise, not the longest, but in terms of airtime, it then turned out to be the longest. And it was the leg from Majuro, so on the Marshall Islands, to Honolulu on Hawaii. And in the air, we were 13 hours and 18 minutes. But of course, with taxiing and preparing, yeah, we were probably crammed in the cockpit for, let's say, something short of 14 hours. But yeah, I shouldn't say crammed because for a small aircraft, it's still quite spacious.
This, well, to be crammed with a co-pilot in a single engine plane, you better make sure that he's your ex-roommate. So I'm glad you worked that part out. uh,
Yeah, well, I didn't tell you why he's my ex roommate and not my current roommate. No, but no, jokes aside, there was not because of any argument. No, it's just our paths separated because of other reasons. Being flatmates, that is.
Very interesting. Now, there were two challenges you had going into this. One was, of course, COVID. You did it in 2022. This was post-pandemic. The other was the whole flight shaming movement that was going around. So here are two guys trying to do this. How did you tackle both of these challenges?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, COVID was one which we were not able to do much. What we were able to do is look at regulations in place and kind of anticipate what might happen. But as most of us realized during the pandemic, and especially with Omicron, it then, yeah, it just turned out to be difficult to get that right. So we planned for a lot of contingencies. We had to do, let's say, 7 days of quarantine in Bangkok just because the aircraft had to go into scheduled maintenance. So we just made sure that we could also skip certain countries, but then the planning just had to be super adjustable. And we set out to just make a robust plan to, prepare for such situations where, let's say, a country would not allow us to enter, and then to be able to mitigate it.
Were there any such instances where you landed and you could not enter the country? You had to just do a tech stop?
Yes, actually, the what I just mentioned, the long leg on the Marshall Islands. So we had to get the Swiss embassy on the Philippines involved to send a note verbal, as we call it. So a question, or let's say a polite request to the Marshall Islands to ask them if we can just do a technical stop, because with COVID they didn't allow anyone into the country, including pilots or aircrew. And they allowed us to do so. And so after flying 12 and a half hours from Guam to Majuro and spending something short of 7 hours on the ground, we departed onto that let's say 13 hours, 18-minute leg. So it was, quite the challenge there, and also something which you're only able to do because we've done it on private operations. Luckily, commercial operations do have other duty time limitations. But we had plenty of rest on Guam, and we were able to sleep in the aircraft. So from a rest perspective, it was okay to do so.
Please tell me there was the autopilot in your aircraft.
Yes, of course.
I'm glad to hear that. That makes me feel better.
No, that was I mean, it doesn't decide any weather-related situations for you, but at least it keeps the aircraft straight and level, so you don't need to concentrate on that too much. But even if not, I mean, the platform is super stable, the DA-50 Diamond aircraft. So we could have probably done it without autopilot, but of course we are happy that we didn't have to try it. But
Right.
that was COVID-wise. I mean, we departed January 2nd, so we were still discussing, for example, Qatar to enter the country around Christmas and Christmas 2021. So just a couple of days before we departed, we still had uncertainties to if we could enter certain countries on our first, let's say, block of countries, which was the part from Switzerland eastwards to Thailand. And so we committed, I think, on Boxing Day to that's now what we're taking with us, and we'll deal with any circumstances along the way. And luckily, we were able to execute that plan. But we took it then step by step. Once we were in Thailand, we looked at the Pacific, and quite frankly, we departed Switzerland without knowing how we would end up crossing the Pacific. So that's not always the
That's a bit unnerving.
from a project perspective, it was unnerving, but just with COVID, we had to learn we can only influence what is in our sphere of influence, and entries into countries were of course not there.
What about SAF? Now, of course, this was a mission to fly as sustainably as possible. Two questions come to mind. One, SAF isn't available everywhere in the world. How did you do it? Second, how did you put in this tiny little aircraft? Did you have to modify the engine? Did you have to do anything technically to support flying on SAF?
Yeah, I mean, the question you asked before also was the flight shaming perspective, and we experienced that, as said, in our just environment, in the sphere we're in, and we realized we need better solutions than just, hey, look at the fuel burn, which is impressive with that aircraft. I mean, it's if you take it per occupant, you can go down to 2.9 liters per 100 kilometers flown, and that's quite competitive to, let's say, an SUV you would have on the road, but you're doing double the speed. But to come back to the SAF part, we were certain that if we have a diesel engine inside, that it's the perfect platform to show that also light aircraft can use SAF. So obviously it's a diesel engine, but it's certified to run on jet fuel. And SAF is certified as jet fuel up to certain blending limits, and we adhered to them whenever we filled in physical SAF. but on a virtual basis you can go beyond, and that's what we try to explain with book and claim, is that we can do 100% because others who are currently not doing up to 50% SAF blending, they will then just take the benefit of getting more SAF and not paying for it. But the emission reductions, of course, is what we can claim.
So, just for those who may not be aware, the listeners, what is book and claim? How does it work?
The way we have set it up, our book and claim, we did it based on what we actually fuel into the aircraft. So once we had a fuel bill from, let's say, an airport which only offers conventional fossil-based jet fuel, we then sent it to a company, a partner of us, Jet Aviation, and they made sure that the same amount of fuel in terms of fuel quantity would flow into the system as SAF at an airport where SAF or SAF is available. And so then the claim for the carbon reduction, which SAF manages to do, that claim is actually our claim, like the ones that initiated the entire booking. And so that's book and claim explained easily, hopefully, also understandably.
Interesting. So, what percentage of your flying was actual SAF in the tank versus book and claim?
Yeah, given the availability of SAF, and that's something we wanted to point out. I mean, we're in the single digit figures of the fuel we uplifted physically, which was actual SAF, and we got critique. I mean, it's critique which is justified in my eyes, that it's not there yet, but it will not be there yet for quite some time, and that's where we then point to, look, with book and claim, you can have an impact even if you're not operating from an airport which has SAF or SAF. And I mean, if we then go into single SAF uplifts in Monterey, California, we managed to uplift 30% SAF blended with jet fuel, and that's quite remarkable, we found, with our engine. But to answer
And
that question as well, we didn't have to do any modifications on the engine. It's certified as Jet A1, so we take the ASTM certifications there.
very good. Now, staying on SAF, you said 30% in California, you managed to uplift. What about the cost? I know SAF is sometimes 3x more expensive, 5x more expensive. What was it for you compared to Jet A fuel?
I mean, Del Monte Aviation was generous enough to provide us with SAF as a partnership, and that's actually how we got the project covered financially, through all these partnerships as various spots, and where also the students helped us in achieving it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible. But the cost, it depends heavily on the production method of SAF. Let's say if it's an e-fuel type, which tends to be, I mean, up to, depending on the grid electricity prices, up to 5 to 8 times the cost of fossil jet fuel. And however, we used biofuels, so-called HEFA SAF or SAF. And here we see prices being 4 times higher compared to fossil jet fuel. But that price range also heavily depends on where you actually uplift it, because in some jurisdictions you will have governments incentivizing the use of SAF and therefore covering some of the costs. So if you uplift SAF physically in Europe, it has a different price, the same SAF as it would have in the US, for example.
That is indeed very interesting. One of the other things you mentioned was not only innovating by trying to fly on SAF as much as possible, but you were on the lookout for innovations and sustainability in the places you were going to. Were there any that stood out to you as, wow, this is really innovative, the world needs to know about this?
I mean, what we always say in terms of biofuels, HEFA fuels, which are made from waste materials, they can support a certain level of demand, but we just simply don't have enough waste materials, also luckily, on our planet to fuel the entire aviation industry on fuel-derived SAF. And so there needs to be an alternative to these SAFs, and we believe that, we and many others, of course, believe that e-fuels are the way to go. So then synthetically produced SAF, which is also then dependent on a carbon source. And we actually, in this regard, visited the Climeworks plant, Orca, direct air capture plant on Iceland, which currently is the world's largest plant and will be superseded by a further of their, I think, marvelous pieces of engineering. So a further plant, which is even larger. And the two things which I think are very impressive is what already exists in terms of a technology that you can actually suck CO2 out of our atmosphere, but also to see the scale where it's at and where it will have to still be developed in order to have an economical impact. So it's super cool to have that technology here and available, but we also realized it's quite a way to go, and that's where we then decided to also try to bring, let's say, solutions in where really everyone can contribute in upscaling these initiatives. And I mean, for example, Climeworks does it by offering subscriptions to users, and they can pay a monthly fee and develop their solution. But I also believe the consumer, as let's say the private pilot, should be able to invest into these ideas.
That's very interesting. Of course, we're familiar with Climeworks here at Simplifying. They are indeed leading this carbon capture space. What else did you see things happening in developing countries that are worth noting as well from an airline as well as airport sustainability perspective?
If we quickly touch on just developing countries as such, I'd like to point out that we are well aware that even if using SAFs, you don't have, if you consider well-to-wake emissions, you don't get, or scope 3 emissions, you're unable to reduce your emissions. Even when using 100% SAF or SAF, you're not able to reduce emissions to 100%. So if you want to fly CO2 neutral, to a certain extent, you still rely on carbon offsets, which will see money flow into more traditional climate protection initiatives. And we just wanted to get an opinion by ourselves to see how they operate. And so, for example, in Nicaragua, we visited one of the initiatives of My Climate, which they do together with Taking Root and Eperdine. And it's actually a community-based reforestation project where farmers plant trees on underutilized or degraded land. And then they have a measurement scheme in place where the farmers will actually get paid depending on, let's say, the progress the trees make on their land. The more they grow, the more funds they will receive. And so in addition to climate protection, that also provides them, the farmers, an additional source of income, which in the area is quite important given the poverty levels we experienced also. And we think that's quite nice to see that you can combine climate protection but also then have a social impact. And quite frankly, compared to what we mentioned before, Climeworks, if you go into bang for buck, it's you can achieve in terms of absorbing carbon from our atmosphere way more by planting trees currently than you can by just investing the same amount of money into direct air capture. And hopefully that will change, and it will change the more people get involved. But currently it still is something we need. Then when it comes to airlines and to airports in India, we found it super interesting what Noida Airport is doing. It's a greenfield airport, so it's developed basically on existing land, which is used for other purposes. And seeing them taking up the challenge of, okay, we're using land to build infrastructure, but also then being aware that that comes with responsibilities of whenever they cut down a tree to make sure that they compensate for it. That was refreshing to see that, yes, the sustainability topic within aviation is quite widespread, regardless of which country you actually visit. There's at least one person who is considerate of what the impact might be and how to tackle it. And especially with Noida, we're following closely to see how they develop to become one of the leading airports. In terms of airlines, there's different commitment levels. You see different incentives, and what we want to point out is what, for example, Lufthansa does with also being aware that there can be a lot of small changes to aircraft, to procedures, which in effect will also bring, or let's say do a lot on the fuel saving. And for example, the Aero Shark technology, which they use to replicate the skin of their aircraft to the ones of sharks and make it aerodynamically more efficient. They're hoping on their 777 fleet to save 1% of fuel burn. And just seeing such technologies also take off, that's pretty cool.
You know what's interesting about this in our chat now? We've talked about SAF, we've talked about tree planting and offsetting, we've talked about direct air capture, we have talked about fuel efficiency through incremental improvements, we've even talked about airport. What about hydrogen? Did you see any innovations around hydrogen or green hydrogen? Because we keep hearing that that is an important potential solution for getting aviation to net zero.
We did actually. We saw it mainly then being used as a predecessor to go on and produce liquid fuels. Flying over the Pacific on liquid fuels, we did experience the advantage of the fuel density. And so we believe green hydrogen, or let's say if hydrogen has or is produced, of course, it should be done with renewable energy, making it green. And what we actually found, and what was super cool flying around the world, we realized that different parts of our globe see different technologies to produce electricity for the green hydrogen to being the preferred way. So, for example, in the desert of the UAE, close to Dubai, we visited a solar park, which obviously let's say the Middle East or the Sahara Belt offer the perfect opportunities to use sun, the energy of the sun as an abundant source. But then if we went closer up to Scandinavia and the North Sea, you see winds tend to be quite steady and quite strong. So wind energy is used for the initiative partners we visited there for the production of green hydrogen. And in Switzerland, for example, we have a lot of hydro, which you can use as a renewable source of energy or electricity. And so, yeah, green hydrogen, of course, it's energy intensive, the entire process, especially if you then also take in the liquid fuel production. And so with the current energy situation in Switzerland, you just realize that that will be a challenge as well to have sufficient electricity available to then use such solutions.
Very, very interesting. Now, were there any airlines or airports that partnered with you to support you in this journey in any way?
There were plenty, yeah. Luckily, and one to point out is Swiss International Airlines. They supported us flying over the Pacific with their mission support. So using ADS-B data, satellite-based ADS-B data, one of their mission controllers actually, or mission supports is what's called, he looked after us. And he made sure to provide us with a weather update every hour. And we were really dependent also on tailwinds. And we made sure with him that the forecast is still matching the accurate situation, just to have an idea if we should turn around or if we should continue. Because on these long flights, you can only go forward or go back. And at a certain point, you can only go forward. Then the decision making becomes more straightforward. But they helped us a lot with that, because also with the time difference, yeah, it's wouldn't have not been feasible for one of the students to stay up. Plus, we were able to of course use their social media channels to report on our trip, our progress, and to then also deliver our message of sustainable aviation to their consumers, but just to the aviation community, and that was quite important, seeing their reach. Other airports which helped us, I mean, too many to mention, but we were quite successful in negotiating landing fees, and without that, especially the support in Thailand, we wouldn't have been able to execute the project.
You know, it's so amazing to see the entire ecosystem coming together to make this flight happen for two guys with a crazy dream of flying around the world on SAF, which is so encouraging. Now, of course, given this mission, I wouldn't say solo, but close to solo. You know, you're like the Wright brothers of SAF here. What were the biggest challenges you encountered? Were there some things that just completely turned out to be not as you expected, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, you expect the unexpected is a phrase we're told in pilot training, and so actually a funny incident, or let's say funny and interesting incident, was in India where two planes departed ahead of us in Ahmedabad, and we were number three. And after we were airborne, we were informed that tire debris were found on the runway. So, I mean, in Ahmedabad, you if you land there, you actually don't need to apply any brakes because the runway, or let's say the tarmac, the surface condition does it for you. It's very rough. So we were like a bit skeptical, but also we concluded that we should be safe because we just didn't feel anything on departure. Nonetheless, and that comes into a bit the ATM part of things, the way you fly in India, low levels, or let's say lower levels, with our aircraft, we were more or less forced to fly from airport to airport because that's where the nav aids sit, and these nav aids also define the airways, so the highways in the sky. And we said, look, if we're flying to, I think Udaipur was an intermediate, we concluded that why not just ask the tower to do a low pass, and the ATC can check our our gear condition. And we managed to boil it down to just check if the tires were round or not. I think that was the wording. And so we did that low.
You were not doing any
I
Top Gun moves there,
mean,
were you?
it's maybe what happened afterwards. This is a bit closer to Top Gun. No, but that was still quite normal. And the air traffic control officer, she deemed the tires to be round, so we can continue to Agra. And then Agra is a airport which is mixed use, military, civil. Yeah,
It's a
and they
military
allowed
airport.
us
Yeah.
to land there, like from a, let's say, a permit perspective. But the approach controller, of course, received notice from Ahmedabad that there were tire debris, and they didn't figure it out to whom it belonged. So he was very hesitant, the approach controller, of letting us land because he didn't want to get his only runway blocked because they were having fighter aircraft in the air and they wanted to get them down. So we had to enter a hold, and there was a bit of a, let's say, a diplomatic game because we're still assuming that he thought at one point we would divert to Jaipur, but we with our entire project at stake, we were like, no, it's an airport we have to land to make the initiative, so we're not giving up that easy. Of course, safety is paramount, but we still had sufficient fuel. So with him, we concluded that we also would have to do a low pass, and then they could check on our tire condition again. And given the weather condition in Agra, we had visibility which was quite bad. I think 1.5 kilometers, and the ceiling, so a cloud ceiling, which was also quite low. So we flew an instrument approach down. And then overflew the runway 200 feet, more or less, just below the cloud deck, for them to check the tire condition, and then went back into the soup and flew another hold until they got their last aircraft down, and then we were granted to land. So yeah, that was
Oh my goodness. So just going from Ahmedabad to Agra, you had to first do a Ahmedabad to
yes.
Udaipur low pass over Udaipur, then off to Agra, and then another low pass in Agra. Luckily, they didn't divert you to Jaipur because that's, like going back to
Yeah.
Udaipur anyway. And then you finally land, and I hope you got to see the Taj Mahal.
We did actually, but no, that was a nice prize. But given it the Diamondo Earthrounding project, of course, we landed, and we after we landed, we got involved again with the initiative of Noida Airport the next day. So it was really also a packed schedule, and some people were like, "Ah, you're doing a flight around the world. You're going on a vacation," and we were like, "Look, it's not even close of relaxing." And we really realized the last month was quite we experienced a lot of long days, and also with the flying, then we still had to get our sleep in, but whenever we were not flying the next day, we tend to have a late night working just on keeping everything up to date and making the project work. So having experienced such an event in the air, which was quite, I mean, not super stressful, but just a lot of work and tends to exhaust you a bit. You then land, and yeah, the project still is there, so you have to get involved.
Now, I know a lot of my pilot friends will definitely be listening to this episode and geeking out around all the details you're sharing. One question is basically flying across the Pacific in a single engine aircraft. How did you extend your range? Of course, this is much harder with hydrogen or batteries, but you had liquid jet fuel. How did you extend your range though?
So, and that's the beauty of liquid jet fuel, the way it's stored. It's more or less not something you need to pressurize. It's not something which is super heavy. The energy density is quite superb if you compare it to other means of storing energy. And we did it with a bladder tank. So the tank itself had a total capacity of 100 gallons, so 380 liters. And the tank itself was a textile which only weighed 5 kilograms. So that's amazing compared to what we could actually store in it. And then we had it connected to the one of the main fuel tanks of the engine, and we used electrical pumps in a redundant setup to then feed the fuel from the bladder tank into the main fuel tank of the aircraft every hour. And so yeah, that with the calculations with the weather over the Pacific, that kept us awake, or at least one of us, because that was just a continuous task we wanted to execute.
I have to ask this at this point. Over the Pacific, flying for 13 hours, how did you take care of your own bladder needs?
Yeah, it's a question we get asked a lot. We always give a different answer. No, we're quite at that point, and me being a cyclist, I more or less know what I can do in terms of managing my intake and let's say my outflow. But we had actually milk cans from Thailand, which were our go-to, let's say, disposal way. And Robin was, I was half fat milk, and Robin was full fat milk, and that's how we got the bottles apart. But actually, we didn't have to use them for these legs because, yeah, we managed to do it without getting dehydrated. And yeah, it's takes some learning into it, but it works. But we had them there just in case.
I'm so glad that you split it between full fat and low fat milk bottles.
Yeah, I mean, after spending so much time together, probably, yeah, but still, we wanted to have some decency there at least.
That's good. Now, of course, this whole attempt, jokes aside, was to showcase how we can fly sustainably around the world. But more importantly, it's one thing for you to fly a single engine plane around the world yourself, but it's completely another to scale sustainable aviation, and that's what this podcast is about a net zero future for aviation, so that all of us can fly wherever we want to without harming the planet. How do you think we can get there? What have you learned from your journey and all your visits around the world?
Yeah, for us, it was quite a learning in how much we had to organize just to get the book and claim system up and running. And then also, I think I had a bit of an interest to know if we do offsetting into which projects it flows into, and just have a good state of mind that the money actually achieves an effect, the money I'm spending into it. And so I decided to just do a spin-off of Diamondo Earthrounding, and together with the partners we have gained throughout the project, offer a solution to everyone flying small aircraft, because there's just, yeah, such an opportunity to dive into that market as well. And if we take individual flyers, their volumes are just not interesting enough for the big fuel suppliers to get involved with them. So I believe there needs to be some intermediary who will aggregate fuel orders for SAF, and that's where we step in with Volant.aero, and just trying to help out where we can on that end. And of course, the educational bit is something which we also need to tackle. We need to make sure that people believe in book and claim, that they also understand the process and why it should be done through book and claim. And that's something which I always advocate when talking to fellow pilots, but also to flight schools doing it. And I strongly believe that we need bottom-up demand, because we have now quite a bit of companies who have worked on different pathways and different feedstocks of producing SAF, but they also need commitments on orders for then going to talk to investors to scale up their production. And I think light GA, light general aviation, we're not the biggest player, of course not in terms of fuel burn, but it is in the aviation ecosystem a very important part, because all of the flight training which gets the other aviations, or let's say pilots, up in the sky, that's done on small planes. And so we need to make sure that we can still fly on small aircraft, which of course are electrified now and which is really good. But we also have a lot of existing aircraft in flight training which use liquid fuels, and we need an alternative for them as well. And that's where we with Volunt.aero want to help out.
That is a very interesting point, right? While the entire industry is focused on large commercial airlines, general aviation is huge. And if there can be a platform for general aviation pilots to fly sustainably, why not, right? So I find that quite encouraging as well. And what is the traction you're getting? Is this Has this been adopted yet? Have you signed some deal with a SAF provider?
We're really in a startup phase, but we have some good commitment from flight schools, but also from private operators, which I know. And I actually did a lot of testing over the summer months, where I went flying, and I also challenged passengers if they'd be willing for, let's say, for me it's a training flight, for them it's combined with seeing the Alps from above. If we can do something on, investing together into SAF virtually. And funny enough, if you explain it, and if if you can convince them that you're doing good things with their funds, and if let's say the entire process is credible, then I believe you can see demand, because if you talk people into what it actually does, and if they see yes, that's good for them, then I'm pretty sure that this will be something a lot of people will do, because they just think that it does the right thing. And of course, it's always credibility with book and claim needs to be there, and that's where we're working on to getting the process transparent. But there's technologies such as blockchain, which still is a bit, let's say, for us as a small startup, one step ahead. But I think there's good ways of getting the audit, the credibility of book and claim right.
Very, very interesting. Of course, early days, and I know certain airlines like Etihad Airways, for example, are doing book and claim and operating 100% SAF or 100% green flights using book and claim. Um, Another question is just the cost. Of course, this mission must have cost you a lot. Did you cover this through sponsorships? How did you pay for this?
Yeah, we still have some backlog of money we need to repay the owner. We still paid a certain rental price on the aircraft, just because, I mean, these engines, they need overhauls, they need maintenance on the airframes. So that's something which costs which arose at his, and we wanted to, or we had to cover them. And there's still a backlog there, and we're hoping through presentations with Diamondo Earthrounding to cover that up and make sure that we're even Steven. But compared to the total budget, which was around 250 to 300,000 US dollars, we're happy with where we're standing right now. But it's without the partnerships from airports who, and also from airlines, but also third parties involved in aviation, which just said, yeah, we provide our services free of charge. That includes hotels and accommodation. We wouldn't have been able to execute, just simply because we didn't have the funds to start with. And we, however, received some money also from donations. And here we wanted to point out that a lot of the donations actually came from private people. And we were really happy to have them, or let's say their name, fly around the world with us, because we, depending on the level of donation, we put on a sticker with their name to the aircraft. And actually, they're still on as we speak on the DA50. And the owner let me keep them on for a bit. But yeah, that's just cool to then tell, or let's say that, yeah, you supported us and your name flew around the world with us.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that, there are individuals who've supported you, not just companies, in this mission.
Yeah.
Final question is, if you had to do this all over again, what would you do differently?
Spend more nights at less stops. So we did a couple of stops where we just spent the night and continued the next day. And yeah, us being quite green, flying in countries where general aviation is not that common, we realized at the time we lost with airport processes was just really unsustainable from a energy perspective, our personal energy. So yeah, that's we would probably do more technical stops, because if you just spend the night at certain locations, we didn't even get to see much of the location anyway. So it's no real point in entering a country if you're unable to experiencing the country. And or let's say we did stops wherever we were visiting sustainable initiatives, stops which were consisted of minimum 2 nights. And that's also the stops we experienced some of the culture of the people living there. And of course, these stops ended up to being the interesting ones. So that's something I would change.
No, that is fascinating. So more Thailand and Hawaii, less Marshall Islands.
Yeah, well, we had plenty of days on Hawaii just because of the wind situation over the Pacific. We actually had to spend 11 days there. So poor us. We planned for 10 days. We ended up staying 11 because just the weather situation didn't improve until then. But it's, yeah, especially in Central America, we had just one night stops, which tend to be quite stressful. So something we would change. And actually, we would then refer to a technical stop maybe over lunch in a place where we ended the day and continue to fly for longer that day, but then have a day off the next day, a day off flying, that
Mhm.
is. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Now, the final part of this interview is actually a rapid fire round in which you have not seen the questions. I'm going to ask you simple things about your preferences, and you have to tell me the first answer that comes to your mind. So we'll start with something simple, right? What's your favorite movie, for example?
Favorite movie is, well, most recent one I saw was Top Gun Maverick. That comes
Of
as a
course.
surprise.
Maybe after the podcast we can get into our favorite scenes because that's something I watched recently as well.
Yes,
What
yes.
about your favorite book? Do you have a favorite book on sustainability even?
On sustainability, not one which I could point out, but I read in preparations for the Around the World trip, Ferry Pilot by, oh, would have to, yeah, I would be lying if I would say I'd still know the author, but Ferry Pilot was the book, and it goes, or it talks about a ferry pilot, hence the name, who has done quite some crazy stuff over the Atlantic in small aircraft, and it was, yeah, interesting to learn from his experiences.
Very interesting. What about your favorite green city or a city that you visited on your flights around the world?
I mean, we were visiting Monterey in California, where we felt the FBO, Del Monte Aviation, just had a very sustainable approach of doing the operations, where we felt very welcome. And of course, California also accompanied the, let's say, yeah, sustainable way of life and infrastructure. So we found that very cool.
Very cool. What about your favorite airline?
Well, hopefully being a future pilot for Swiss International Airlines, that's an easy one. No, I I do like Swiss also from a passenger perspective, but being a pilot for them in the future, yeah, that would be my go-to.
Very nice. Well, who doesn't like an airline that gives you chocolates before landing, right?
That's how we yeah, try to make up for any inconveniences you might have
Like
discovered.
landing on time. um,
Yes, yeah, yeah, got us there.
what about something that you still want to learn?
More about sustainability. There's so much still sustainability in aviation, and I was able to attend a conference with Lufthansa a couple of weeks ago in New York, where we talked with people doing different bits of the industry. For example, just learning on what GE is planning to do with open fan technology, but then also learning of alternative ways, pathways to produce SAF, which are not yet certified. That's so much happening right now. And I think sometimes I wish the day was longer because apart from all the flight training, I just catch myself reading books then at night, and I feel like I should go to bed because I have a flight in the next day. But I would just like to, get involved even more with what's happening.
That's fantastic. And final question, what is the best advice you have received that helped you in this mission?
Well, when flying, you need brains, you need speed, and you need altitude. But actually, out of the three, you only always need two. And so you can come up with the combinations, and they tend to work. Yeah.
I love that. That's a new one. I've not heard that before. But thank you so much for sharing, Matthias. This has been a great conversation, close to heart. And kudos to you and Robin for doing this, showing us a way by leading through example of how this can be done. And I'm sure lots of general aviation pilots, airline pilots, even non-pilots will be inspired by your story. Thanks again for sharing.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, and I'll forward the kudos to our team because, I mean, we were able to fly, but really it was a team of 9 who pulled off the project, all under the age of 30, so a lot of what you were saying also goes onto their account.
That's fantastic. Congratulations once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. We hope you liked it and will share it with your network. Please also leave us a review. Awareness is the key to a green future. Your support will help our insights on sustainable aviation reach a wider audience. In addition, for every single listen of this podcast, we will plant a tree. And for every single review, we will plant 50 trees. You can also write to us at podcast@simpliflying.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website, simpliflying.com, and join the movement.